Hello and welcome to my video on placebo and nocebo effects. In my videos, I discuss real health issues which help me understand why a belief worked to regain my health. In this video, I will discuss allergies, and in the next video, I will discuss the inflammation that occurs in esophageal cancer. There are situations where a placebo may have a mixed or no effect. I will discuss the reasons why in a video on the flu-like symptoms, and I will also share with you how I found a resolution that helped me regain my health. In the fourth video of this series, I will discuss my criticism of the medical research regarding nocebo and placebo effects, and the medical paradigm, and why I reject the simple notions of the power of the mind and mind over body without beliefs being taken into account. I also reject the doctor-patient relationship as being the placebo effect. And I want to say here at the start that my experience and the experience of an acquaintance that I will relate in this video are contrary to the medical opinion and contrary to the accepted medical views on allergies. I saw a striking situation in the early 1990s in Sydney with an acquaintance who stayed at my house as a guest. At the time, I was totally ignorant about allergies. My guest was chatting with me and my husband when suddenly he saw our cats and urgently asked us to keep the cats away from him, because he said he had an allergy to cats and that if he came into contact with a cat, he would suffer a serious allergic reaction, an anaphylactic shock. So my husband and I made sure the cat stayed outside. He slept on the couch and stayed for about a week, and he had no allergic reaction. I remembered this incident recently after having had an allergy myself and having researched allergies on the net and had discussion with some doctors. All the doctors advised that if a person comes into contact with the allergen, fur in the case of my acquaintance guest, he or she would have an allergic reaction. It was then that I realized that it was cat fur and not simply the cats that was the problem. The cats had spent a lot of time on our couch, so the couch was covered in fur. He would have come into contact with fur, and yet he had no reaction. How was this possible? An allergy is said to be a damaging immune response in reaction to a substance such as particular foods, pollen, plants, fur and dust, which are harmless substances. This is a common observation made by doctors. A person may have no reaction being exposed to a substance which they call an allergen many times, sometimes for years, and then suddenly they become allergic. The person's immune system is said to be mistakenly activated to produce antibodies to fight the allergen as if it was a pathogen. When the person's body comes into contact with that substance again, it releases the antibodies and a cascade of events follows, which causes symptoms as, for instance, redness, itching and burning. From then on, the person is to have become hypersensitive to the substance or allergen. I found that this reasoning, at least for me, was wrong. In my case, I was pulling out some weeds in my front yard, which I had periodically removed for years. When I went back inside my house, a rash erupted on my arm. I washed the area with soapy water, but it had little effect. The skin on my arm was slightly swollen, stinging and red for about an hour, and the rash didn't completely go away for several hours. For a time I avoided the weeds, but then one day I decided to clear them away. I was careful this time, but did briefly touch the weeds, and again I had a rash. It was worse this time, and I sought to try to treat it. I used some witch hazel. I rubbed it into my skin, and about 10 minutes later the stinging and the redness were gone. I mentioned this to my husband and he laughed. He said that definitely was a placebo effect, and proceeded to tell me that he had accidentally spilt the witch hazel and was rinsing the bottle with water when he was interrupted. I later found the bottle on the sink and put it in the cupboard, so I had washed my skin with plain water, believing it was witch hazel. I realized then that I had replaced a belief about the weeds being toxic and harmful with another belief that the witch hazel would neutralize the toxic effects. This caused my body to immediately cease the inflammatory response and bring about healing. That is why I saw a placebo effect. But I went a lot further than that. I discovered that the unnecessary and damaging immune response may be a reaction to a manufactured belief. I explain how this is done in my video series on the underlying conditions of disease. A concealed threat is first used to cause the person fear. Then a suggestion is made through a strongly related person. Unaware of the cheat, the person may associate the fear with the suggestion and thus form a belief. Thus there may be a somatic reaction, which is an immune response. So my allergy was a nocebo effect, a reaction to a negative belief. A year later, after having no trouble with the weeds, I again had a momentary reaction, but this time I noticed a thought had appeared in mind. The thought was that the weeds were toxic, and the thought arose suddenly. I also identified a sudden feeling hot, which I realized was fear. I was being threatened by somebody. Knowing about the foul play, I realized that this was only a suggestion. I rejected the idea and affirmed that the weeds were harmless, and the tingling feeling in my arm faded, and there was no rash. In a later repeated episode, having been more alert, I rejected the idea immediately and I had no reaction at all. And that came after I had antibodies. So simply having the antibodies does not mean that there is necessarily an immune response. Thus, contrary to the medical view, instead of becoming more and more hypersensitive, I had no inflammatory response to the weeds ever again. I was now rejecting ideas about weeds being toxic. So, my allergy disappeared because my body no longer reacted with inflammation. My experience is anecdotal evidence, so you may ask, how can you say that this would happen to other people? I can say with certainty that a belief can lead to inflammation in other people from the evidence seen in the reactions of the thousands of patients in the control arms of drug trials, in the testing of chemotherapy drugs. The patients in the control arm who believe that they have taken a real drug will suffer the same side effects as the patients in the intervention arm who have been given the real drug, but for a different reason. All the patients know that the real drug is harmful to rapidly dividing cells, so the roots of the hair of patients given the real drug get damaged and their hair falls out. Patients given the dummy drug who believe that they have been given a real drug will have fear about harmful effects in their body. Their belief, together with the fear, will ignite an inflammatory response to clear away the cells that they believe must be damaged. But their cells are not damaged, so the inflammatory response is unnecessary and damages healthy cells at the root of their hair, so their hair falls out. This is the simple form of the nocebo effect. The evidence I saw in the nocebo effect challenged the medical paradigm that the body is a machine, which I had learnt at university, when I realised that the body is purpose-driven because a specific belief gives rise to changes in bodily reactivity. This sheds light on the incident in Sydney with my guest who is allergic to cat fur. If it was simply a case of physical contact with an allergen, as all the doctors have insisted, then when he came into contact with the fur, he would have had a serious allergic reaction, an anaphylactic shock. Another reason the doctors gave was that maybe he was not really allergic. But I had mentioned his fear of the cats to his parents when I saw them again sometime after his visit. They confirmed that he had a very serious allergy problem with cats. His parents told me that his problem began when he was about 5 years old, and it has been a serious problem since then. To me, this is very strong evidence that it is a belief that plays the key role and not some physical contact. He did not know that the cats had been on the couch where he sat every day and slept every night for a week. He believed that he had no contact with the cats and thus no contact with cat fur, so he felt safe. His lack of knowledge helped him uphold the belief that he was safe, and that protected him. And my ignorance protected him too, because as I had believed that he had to come into contact with the cats to have a problem, I had no ideas about cat fur on the couch in mind, which he would have insightfully perceived and which would have caused him to have an allergic reaction. I explain my understanding of how ideas become entrenched beliefs as to bring about an allergic reaction in another video on allergies. Thank you for viewing my video. In the next video, in the discussion of inflammation in the esophagus, as may occur in esophageal cancer, I will discuss the nocebo effect in more detail, and I will also discuss how to create a placebo effect. I'll see you in the next video. And here is a glimpse of the Ulysses butterfly that often frequents my garden.